Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Peace be upon you. The U.S. President George Bush announced that he wants to see an actual and final elimination of North Korea's nuclear program, and not just freezing it. Meanwhile, during a press conference with visiting Chinese Prime Minister Wen Jiabao, Bush stated that any unilateral steps by Taiwan toward independence are not acceptable, adding that the U.S. and China are working together in the war on terror. Jiabao stated that the U.S. must commit to the agreements which form the basis for the policies on Taiwan for many years. For the first time since detaining about 660 people at Guantanamo Bay, the U.S. authorities allow a lawyer to meet with his Australian client, accused of cooperating with Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Attorney Stephen Kinney said that he hopes that his visit will open the doors for other detainees to hire attorneys or communicate with international organizations working on their cases after more than 2 years of being detained. Pakistan's Prime Minister Zafarullah Khan Jamali is on an official visit to France. He commented saying that Afghan President Hamid Karzai is wrong in blaming Pakistan for not stopping Taliban and Al-Qaeda activities on the borders, demanding that Afghanistan be more responsible with their statements, reiterating that his country supports holding elections and rebuilding Afghanistan, and adding that they do not want to meddle in Afghanistan's internal affairs. Jamali added that Pakistan should not be responsible for Afghanistan's inability to solve their internal problems. Israel accuses the United Nations of hypocrisy after the UN's General Assembly approved presenting the case of the Israeli separating wall at the International Justice Court in The Hague. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Authority sees this decision as a clear message to Israel, saying that the policies of this forced reality is unacceptable. Voices are emerging from within the ruling party in Israel, demanding that they reconsider the issue of the separating wall, which is dividing the Palestinian territories under the pretext of protecting Israel from Palestinian attacks.
Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon has just completed the construction of the first part of the wall that he started to build in July 2002. However, this wall is receiving international criticism. In a recent strike against Israel, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution to present the case of the Israeli wall at the International Justice Court in La Haye. In response, Israel strongly criticized the United Nations.
Yesterday, the United Nations undertook an action of total hypocrisy. They did not condemn hundreds of Palestinian terrorist attacks targeting Israeli civilians. Rather, they condemned the wall, which is supposed to protect their civilians.
Meanwhile, the Palestinian Authority sees the UN General Assembly's decision as a victory for justice and international law.
I think it's a very clear message to Israel that these types of violations and efforts to impose one-sided borders and put the Palestinians in cages is not acceptable.
Perea clarified that if Israel wants to build the wall, then it should do so on its land. But these were not Sharon's intentions. His plan was to construct the 608-kilometer-long wall on Palestinian territories. Hence, it will make it impossible for the Palestinians to demand this land back in the future. Currently, about 12,000 Palestinians from the West Bank are now behind this wall. About 100,000 Palestinians are directly affected by this fence, since their fields are on one side of the wall and their homes are on the other side. The International Justice Court will only give their legal ruling on the wall, and Israel may not comply with their judgment, since it will only have a moral significance, further proving that Israel claims to protect its citizens by violating the rights of other people.
His Majesty the King is back home after a trip to the United States and the United Kingdom, which was in line with his efforts to get the Palestinian-Israeli peace process up and running again and rally support for the Palestinian position. In a gesture to Royal Jordanian on the airline's 40th anniversary, His Majesty broke with custom and returned from New York aboard RJ's flight 2262. The King, who usually flies aboard his private plane in his foreign trips, lauded the national carrier as Jordan's ambassador to the world. Over the course of the flight, the King was assured on the passengers who were surprised but happy at his presence, amongst them aboard the Airbus 340, which joined RJ's fleet last summer. In White House talks with President George W. Bush, King Abdullah made it clear the region was going through hard times and lobbied Washington to do its utmost to solve outstanding issues and alleviate Palestinian suffering. The King warned that the building by Israel of a separation barrier would jeopardize a future Palestinian state and also had an impact on Jordan's security. In meetings with administration officials and in television interviews, His Majesty also stressed the need for Israel to give a chance to Palestinian Prime Minister Ahmed Al-Quraysh by stopping settlement expansion and construction of the fence and ending the crippling closures and checkpoints. On Iraq, King Abdullah called for the speedy handover of power to Iraqis and strengthening national institutions in the occupied country. And in his endeavor to rectify misconceptions about Islam and depicting the real image of the faith, the King addressed 400 New York police, telling them Islam is a religion of justice and diversity.
I learned the Geneva Conventions. But long before these conventions, and way back in the 7th century, Muslim soldiers were given strict rules of conduct to protect civilians. Even today, most Muslim school children learn a famous speech by Abu Bakr, the first successor of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The speech commands integrity, forbids the killing of innocents of any faith, and bans destruction. It says, do not betray, do not deceive, do not bludgeon and maim. Do not kill a child, nor a woman, nor an old man. If you come across communities who have consecrated themselves to the Christian church, leave them be. No one can learn these words and believe that the slaughter of innocents is sanctioned by our faith. In fact, the vast majority of the world's 1 billion Muslims are a people of peace. We are horrified to see our religion exploited by terrorists.
As Israeli leaders faced international pressure to stop the wall construction, Israeli troops continued a policy of destroying Palestinian homes. Israeli bulldozers demolished a house in the East Jerusalem village where dozens of soldiers were brought into the site to quell any protest by Palestinians. The house demolitions fall within what Palestinians call Israel's attempt to Judaize Jerusalem and are intended to forestall any attempt by Palestinians to lay claim to the occupied city. And in sweeps in the northern West Bank, Israeli soldiers arrested 9 Palestinians as they stormed Balata refugee camp near the city of Nablus and searched homes. The latest military action comes as Palestinians pledged new efforts to coax Palestinian factions into a ceasefire with Israel after talks in Cairo broke down, undermining Prime Minister Ahmed Al-Quraysh and the U.S.-backed peace roadmap. Moving to other news, 2 suicide attacks in Iraq wound 60 U.S. soldiers, and the resistance shoots down a U.S. military helicopter, and a mosque comes under attack, with 3 Iraqis dead. A suicide bomber blew himself up at a U.S. Army compound near Baghdad, likely injuring 2 soldiers. A U.S. military officer at the site said the bomber approached the gate of a hospital north of Baghdad, a base for U.S. forces. The attack came hours after a suicide bomber blew up a car packed with explosives at the gate, a military barracks near the northern city of Mosul, wounding 60 soldiers and 6 Iraqi civilians. The U.S. military said soldiers manning the gate at the camp had opened fire after the driver charged towards them, ignoring orders to stop. An explosion also rocked a Sunni mosque in the Iraqi capital Baghdad, killing 3 Iraqis. People living nearby said 2 loud explosions rocked the mosque at the neighborhood of Baghdad. And witnesses near the restive city of Fallujah said a U.S. observation helicopter crashed after it was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. The U.S. military said the helicopter did crash, but did not confirm that it was downed. There were no casualties or fatalities in the crash. U.S. troops have launched an airborne assault in southeastern Afghanistan as a UN report warns that the security situation may derail global efforts to rescue Afghanistan. The latest offensive is part of what the U.S. military calls its biggest ever operation against the Taliban and their allies. The U.S. has lately stepped up military operations in Afghanistan, but they were overshadowed by the deaths of 9 children killed in a U.S. airstrike in the southern province of Ghazni on Saturday. They are only the latest victims in a long list of civilian casualties killed accidentally by U.S. forces. Meanwhile, a UN report said Afghanistan's security had eroded to the point that global efforts to rescue it after 2 decades of war could fail unless nations expand their role there. The report, covering developments from July last year to November this year, was released as hundreds of Afghans came to the capital, Kabul, for an assembly to adopt a new constitution.
In those next 12 months, either we will consolidate the situation, we'll build the institutions that were envisaged by the Bonn Agreement. We will have an Afghanistan which has a solid constitution, which has elected authorities, or if we go in a half-hearted way in that effort, then indeed what has been achieved in the past 2 years could be compromised.
A new Israeli incursion into the Palestinian occupied territories resulted in the expulsion of 1 Palestinian family and the arrest of several Palestinian citizens.
Israeli occupation troops expelled today a Palestinian family from its house in a Tabor neighborhood in occupied Jerusalem and arrested 2 Palestinians during an incursion into Jenin. Israeli troops announced a state of high alert in the area of Kafr Saba and the city of Qalqilia, tightening their harsh measures on the 1948 territories. Rafiq al-Nishi, the Speaker of the Palestinian Legislative Council, said there is no political horizon for the peace process with the Sharon's government, stressing that the Palestinian people will never give up their legitimate rights. Al-Nishi announced that the Legislative Council will meet next week in a private session to announce its position towards the Geneva document, adding that the Palestinians cannot agree on any document which deviates from the legitimate Palestinian principles. For his part, Nabil Abordaina, the advisor for the Palestinian president, said that the failure to reach an agreement among the Palestinian factions who met in Cairo is not the end of dialogue, adding that there is always an opportunity for resuming dialogue in a way which strengthens the Palestinian unity. Meanwhile, the office of the Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon announced that Israel has been building since a year ago a tunnel underground which will house the members of the Israeli government in case of war. Associated France Press quoted the Israeli Ministerial Council as saying that a large tunnel has been dug west of Jerusalem in a secret location and equipped with a sophisticated communication system. The Israeli newspaper Yedot Ahronot said the tunnel will cost more than $100 million.
Iraqi resistance men killed an American soldier near a petrol station in Al-Mosul today, as former UN Chief Arms Inspector Scott Treiter said the war against Iraq was launched to ensure a US military presence in the Middle East.
An American soldier was killed and another wounded in a fire exchange near a petrol station in Al-Mosul. Earlier yesterday, an American soldier was killed and 2 others were wounded in the city in a resistance operation against the occupation forces, whereas eyewitnesses reported the killing of 2 soldiers and the wounding of 2 others in that operation. Meantime, an Iraqi citizen was killed by an explosive charge. The two policemen were injured in an attack against their patrol in Al-Mosul. A statement released by the American Central Command reported the killing of an Iraqi citizen by the fire of two helicopters in the city of Ramadi to the west of Baghdad, where the American troops detained 82 citizens in an incursion. Meanwhile, scores of South Korean electricity workers left Iraq in the aftermath of the killing of two of their mates in the town of Tikrit last month. The Bangladesh authorities also evacuated its diplomats from Baghdad. In another development, the former president of the UN Arms Inspectors in Iraq, Scott Ritter, described the US war on terrorism as a big cheating, stressing that this war led only to expanding the area of evil acts. Interviewed by a Czech magazine, Ritter said that the war on Iraq was launched neither because of mass destruction weapons nor because of the existence of Iraqi threats. He clarified that the war was launched to ensure a U.S. military presence in the Middle East with the aim of enabling Washington to extend its domination all over the world. In Washington, two U.S. senators severely criticized the policy of the U.S. President George Bush in Iraq. Senator Hillary Clinton said that President Bush's administration did not plan well to the post-war period. On his part, former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Newt Gingrich, called for a larger Iraqi participation in administrating the country.
The Japanese Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi defended his decision to send troops to Iraq, saying that the Japanese forces will not participate in the war and will not use force. In a press conference, Koizumi said that the step is intended to provide humanitarian aid and to help in the reconstruction of Iraq. He added that bringing stability to Iraq is very important to bringing stability to the Middle East, which is in the interest of the international community and national security of Japan. Koizumi announced that in addition to donating $500 million to Iraq by 2007, Tokyo will also contribute manpower, including Japanese troops. But he did not clarify the timing or the size of the forces that will be sent. He said that the time of deployment will be announced at a time after the Defense Minister, Shigeru Oshiba, outlines the military plan for sending Japanese soldiers abroad. This is the largest operation of its kind since the end of World War II.
In occupied Palestine, one man was martyred when the occupation forces opened fire on Palestinian civilians near Kalandia checkpoint north of Jenin. The occupation forces raided Rafah city, injuring two other young Palestinian men and bulldozing a large area of land, especially in the Al-Barazil neighborhood. The occupation forces also arrested 8 Palestinians, including one woman in Nablus city. According to Palestinian sources, unknown people opened fire on the car of Taysir Khalid, a member of the political wing of the Democratic Front of the Liberation of Palestine. No one was injured in the incident. At the political level, the Palestinian Authority welcomed the decision of the United Nations General Assembly, asking the International Court of Justice in The Hague to decide on the legality of the apartheid wall which is being built by Israel on Palestinian land. Nasser al-Qudwa, the Palestinian representative in the United Nations, said that passing the resolution to present the case to the International Court of Justice in The Hague will strengthen the Palestinian position politically and legally, and it will weaken the Israeli position. He confirmed that the time has come to replace the rule of force with the rule of law. The General Secretary of the Arab League, Amr Moussa, welcomed the decision of the United Nations General Assembly and criticized the decision of some countries to oppose the resolution without giving any other alternatives. The United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution to present the case of the Israeli apartheid wall in the International Court of Justice. 90 countries approved the resolution, 8 countries opposed it, and 74 countries abstained.
In front of one hotel in the Kremlin, in the heart of the Russian capital of Moscow, a strong explosion erupted, killing and injuring dozens of people, as well as destroying a number of commercial buildings. Meanwhile, the U.S. joins the European Cooperation and Security Organization in casting doubts on the results of the latest Russian parliamentary elections. 2 days after the pro-Putin party won the Russian parliamentary elections, an explosion took place in front of a hotel at the Kremlin, in the heart of the Russian capital of Moscow, killing 6 people, injuring 13 others, and destroying commercial buildings in the area. There were contradictory reports. Some say that it was a Chechen woman, while others say that some people who oppose the results of the elections have carried out the operation. The Russian Attorney General told news agencies that the suspected Chechen woman was among the bystanders. Police officers evacuated the area of the explosion, fearing that other timed explosive devices were left in the area. Paramedics and medical teams pulled the bodies from the rubble and transferred the injured ones to the hospital. It is worth mentioning that before the beginning of the elections, another huge explosion took place on a train in northwestern Russia, along the border with Chechnya, killing 44 people and injuring dozens of others. The Russian president strongly condemned the explosion, saying that the objective of the attackers is to hurt the Russian economy and hinder the progress of democracy, especially after the parliamentary elections. Meanwhile, the United States joined the European Cooperation and Security Organization in casting doubts on the results of the latest Russian parliamentary elections. The U.S. says that the victory of the pro-Putin party will lead to another victory in the presidential elections, which then will give Putin a lot of political power, enabling him to amend the Constitution so he can stay in office for a 3rd presidential term. This may lead to many problems, including more operations against these elections.
A 12th meeting of the Caspian Working Group opened in Tehran on Tuesday. Deputy foreign ministers and special envoys from the littoral states are attending the 2-day get-together. Iranian Foreign Minister Kamal Kharrazi told participants consensus should be at the center of any decision made regarding the landlocked sea, adding the experience of the past decade shows unilateral measures and agreements which do not draw on consensus make the problems more complicated and are followed by misunderstanding. Kharrazi said joint exploitation of Caspian resources is the best choice to write a legal regime for the Caspian Sea, adding Tehran is at the ready to hold talks over willingness by some Caspian states to divide up the sea. Foreign Minister Kamal Kharrazi said on Tuesday, Tehran is seriously pursuing efforts to secure the release of 3 European tourists who have gone missing in the southeastern province of Sistan and Baluchistan. Kharrazi said the Ministries of Interior and Intelligence have been tasked with following the case and that Tehran hopes to see it closed as soon as possible. The top diplomat further said foreign nationals should have made advanced coordination with the police before traveling overland in the province, but that the missing tourists did not inform law enforcement forces. The European Union Foreign Ministers' Council Tuesday welcomed Iran's commitment to, quote, fully and promptly comply with the International Atomic Energy Agency requirements and released EU foreign policy, that is, requested EU Foreign Policy Chief Javier Solana to visit Tehran early 2004 to take forward the EU-Iran dialogue. In a statement issued at the end of the EU Foreign Ministerial session, the Council reiterated the EU's readiness to explore ways to develop wider political and economic cooperation with Iran. His statement, however, noted, quote, "This can only be achieved through full international confidence in Iran's adherence to non-proliferation and in particular in the peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program."
Celebrated American actor Richard Gere is visiting the Dome of the Rock and the Old City of East Jerusalem in Palestine. Gere is meeting with the Palestinian Legislative Council member Dr. Hanan Ashwari in Ramallah. The American actor's visit is part of a solidarity campaign with the Palestinian people living under Israeli occupation.
The Guantanamo prisoners have become a source of embarrassment to the United States in the wake of the increasing criticism from human rights organizations in many countries, including its allies. The issue is controversial in Western countries because a number of their citizens are imprisoned in Guantanamo, like Australia, Britain, and Canada. The United States transferred Taliban and Al-Qaeda suspects to Guantanamo Bay because its status is still undetermined. It is in the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles away from Afghanistan. The United States hoped that these detainees would be away from people's attention. It never expected these prisoners who are being held in such a remote area to become the center of attention. In countries like Canada, Australia, Britain, and even in the United States itself. 2 years after the arrival of 660 detainees to this military base, their case started causing embarrassment to the United States administration, even after categorizing them as military combatants. Giving this special category enabled the United States to detain them without charging them with anything and without allowing them to obtain a lawyer or even trying them in a court. However, during the past 3 weeks, it seems that the United States has changed its position after its allies in the so-called war on terrorism pressured it to do so. The United States decided to try the Australian David Hawkes in a military tribunal and with a military lawyer who will be chosen by the Pentagon. This evoked new controversy among human rights advocates.
What is sensitive about this case is that David must have both military and civilian lawyers attending the military court, and his family should be allowed to hire a civilian lawyer. That would be a step in the right direction, but that has not been determined yet.
The case of the British Guantanamo prisoners is still causing differences and embarrassment between the two close allies, Prime Minister Tony Blair and President Bush. There are also similar problems in Canada, which may put the judicial system in this country to a difficult test. The Canadian lawyer who was defending the ex-Guantanamo prisoner, Abdel Rahman Al-Khadr, announced that he is withdrawing from the case because somebody threatened to kill him.
I am withdrawing from representing all those I have been defending. I will not take any case that has any link with national security or terrorism.
The death threat came when an unknown person left a message in the personal voicemail of the lawyer, Rico Galati.
Well, Mr. Galati, what's this I hear about you working with the terrorists? Now helping to get that punk terrorist Al-Qadr off? Now you're a dead wop.
Al-Khadr was released in October 2003 after being imprisoned in Guantanamo for 1 year. American authorities extradited him to Afghanistan against his will. He then returned to Toronto in Canada to prove his innocence.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.